I'm sure will be a really full and interesting day. So hopefully I can add to that, and I think some of the things I'm going to talk about link into pretty much every item on the agenda, really. So just a bit about my role as head of communities at Devon County Council. So there's four bits to it, really. So one is around commissioning. So that's around commissioning 50 libraries in Devon, our youth service and youth work, and the youth centres that we have, our work around domestic abuse. Alongside that, work around community safety, and working certainly at a strategic level with key partners around aspects of community safety, and that also includes things like prevent and work around extremism and counter-terrorism. The third bit is around working particularly with community groups and the voluntary and community sector. We still provide quite a bit of funding to a range of organisations, including Devon Community Devon Communities Together, who are hosting and running today, as well as DALC, Devon Association of Local Councils, and a range of other partners. And also working with a range of vulnerable communities, so the Gypsy and Traveller community as an example, and working with refugees and the Syrian family resettlement programme. So it was a pretty busy job anyway, and I think this time last year, sitting to reflect on what 2020 would bring in terms of kind of planning, I didn't necessarily put a lot of thought into what we ended up leading in terms of providing that wider community support that sat alongside all of the good work that you've been doing over the last year. Alongside that, my team have been leading the response to the 36,000 clinically extremely vulnerable in Devon, and during the summer that including the direct provision of food to about 8,000 of them, and we're now working on a plan over the next couple of weeks around responding to free school meals and putting in place support to vulnerable families and children over the Christmas holidays and February half term and Easter, in terms of holiday clubs and food provision. So I think I just want to spend a few minutes really just reflecting with you on what's been, a really interesting but challenging year. I think reflecting the value of planning, but also I'm thinking about the boxer Mike Tyson's quote that everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So clearly the value of planning, but also needing to kind of reflect on the kind of learning and be able to adapt quickly as well. And I kind of want to reflect on what is likely to be a really tough winter. So I'm going to share with you my thoughts on I mean, I've identified 6 risks or pressures that I think we need to reflect on across communities over the next few months. Some of them will relate to some of your communities more than others, but these are 6 things that I'm particularly concerned about. I want to leave you with some positives as well, because I think we can talk ourselves into a bit of doom and gloom, and then I'll be happy to take some questions. So I think I better start with COVID though, and I just want to reflect back on we've tried to communicate with towns and parish councils around that are kind of planning and support around COVID, and we wrote to you through DALC and DCT in October last, I think, just to really share. I mean, it'd be really good after the session to kind of to get some feedback in terms of how helpful some of that communication is and how clear you all are in terms of what's happening from a health and county council perspective. But that when we wrote to you in October, really we were pointing to a number of key pieces of information that we think are pretty much in plain sight, that should be helpful to all of you in terms of your thinking and planning in your communities. So part of that key information is around the description of what's called the local outbreak management plan. So the sense that the centre have a plan to respond to a number of COVID related scenarios. And that specifically also relates to both the changing, evolving government guidance, which, you know, as you know, is moving every day, if not every hour. But also particular guidance around settings, so you know, factories, pubs, those kind of things, and the plan we've got in place to respond to some of that. The website, the DCC website, also contains a whole range of information around the cases themselves and where the cases currently are in Devon. So you know, that information is the same information that government are seeing, and that's updated daily. So you can, at nearly a parish level, see for yourself on a daily basis the prevalence of COVID cases in your area. And if you think that's helpful to you, certainly you can look at that on a very regular basis and get a sense of how things are shifting and evolving in terms of the cases across Devon. And there's an interactive map on our website that allows you to do that. The communication in October also talked about the governance. So within Devon, there is a health protection board, which essentially is the kind of overarching governance for decisions around COVID-19 in Devon. So that's chaired by, Devon and Torbay. Actually, it's a joint board with Torbay. So that's chaired by the directors of public health in both Devon and Torbay. And as I say, that takes key decisions and provides some key scrutiny around Devon-related decisions in terms of COVID. And sitting alongside that is the local outbreak engagement board, which is a key. You know, the function around that board. It's a public meeting. It's a public body. Is really to provide, again, some additional oversight, but also to look at the communication and the kind of political aspects of plans and delivery in Devon. And Louise and Devon Communities Together and Cara from DALC both sit on that board. So and regularly feed in information from communities, but also that's a route not only to share information from that board, but it's a route for you and me to ask questions of those decision makers. We also talked about the Connect Me bulletin. So it's an email that you can receive regularly. You can get that sent to your local council or to parishioners. Anyone can sign up for it. And that pretty much gives all of the current information that the respective boards I've talked about are considering. And so that's, you know, in terms of your planning around COVID, that's a really vital bit of information. We also shared our key points of contact with district councils. So I think we're really proud of our relationship with district councils and yourselves in terms of the wider local government family around this kind of notion of Team Devon, the sense that there is really clear connection, and particularly with the county council and district councils, we've developed arrangements around district councils being the single point of contact, for example, around the clinically extremely vulnerable, but around hardship funding and those sorts of things. So, you know, we see the district councils as being both for the public and potentially for yourselves the key a key point of contact. And alongside that, Devon Communities Together have set up a helpline for you all to access with a website that's been funded by the County Council, which again we hope provides some really important and timely support, information and guidance for you. We also talked about the things that you might want to do in terms of your preparation, and that's around particularly thinking around the most vulnerable people in your communities, thinking about those local groups and support networks, and promoting the pinpoint tool, which is a pretty simple tool to allow organisations to post who they are and the work they do, to allow us to have a single directory in Devon. And also we've pointed you to sort of key guidance and the action cards which set out informations around the key settings in communities. So I hope that's been useful. I think the things that I've talked about and the communications talked about, I think are some really key bits of information that I think anyone would want in their local community to think about the planning around COVID. I guess, we now also need to think about vaccination and the vaccination sites, and I know that's a very live issue within the Health Protection Board arena. Pretty much hot off the press. I think so it's looking likely that primary care sites, so doctor surgeries, are going to be the key points of contact around vaccinations in Devon. Those have yet to be fully decided, but I would expect to see, very soon over the next few days, more details coming out around where they will be, and a plan in terms of who will be prioritised around that kind of vaccination, but also local contact tracing. So, we've heard lots in the press around test and tracing, and there's certainly a movement at a local level to drive arrangements to have a much more locally based contact tracing set of arrangements. And again, that's a very live bit of work, and I would expect over the next few weeks for us to be in a position to communicate the details of that much more roundly. So again, I'm happy to take any questions in a minute when I've shut up. But I just want to move on to just some of my reflections around some of perhaps our wider pressures. I know your agenda is already going to cover some of the standard winter pressures, if you like. So severe weather and its impact, and flooding. So I'm not, I'm going to take those as read, that those are things that are of concern. And I know that many of you have done lots of planning and work around the impacts of those things within your communities. But I'm just going to throw in six other things to reflect on. They're in no particular order. They're not new. You will know more about these than I do probably, but these are my six, and again, be really good to get your reflections on these. So we're now 30 days. So number one, we're now 30 days from the EU transition, and I'm not being controversial by saying it's really difficult to predict what the impact will be. We know that there will be change, and I think again, it's not controversial to say we know there will be some disruption. What that looks like across Devon, it is difficult to say at this stage. But I think as we've seen with over the last year, the public's response and reaction isn't necessarily aligned to the reality on the ground. So, for example, we may have panic buying, which doesn't reflect the reality of supplies on the ground, as we saw with toilet rolls earlier in the year. So I think EU transition clearly is a thing that we need to be well aware of, and we need to pick up the impacts on our communities as from the 1st of January. The second thing for me is around trust and confidence. And I guess, I'm talking about trust in the state, trust in authority, and probably by extension, um, trust in us as the kind of local government family. I think whatever happens at the government level inevitably reflects on the system, and I think we're all part of that. And I think inevitably it may mean that some of our messages are harder to land. Maybe some of them are ignored. Um, and I think, potentially we will, get some blame for decisions that are made elsewhere. That's always been the case, but I think that feels like certainly a growing issue that we saw pre-COVID as well. But I certainly think for us moving forwards, that's a thing, and something we need to kind of reflect on, and perhaps change the way we communicate and respond as a result of that. But I think in mitigation, it's also a really good time to be confident and talk us up. We're meeting today, as part of the system, trying to fix things, trying to make things better. And I think, talking each tier of local government up, I think is really a really important part in developing that kind of shared trust and confidence in what we're doing. The economy, the Chancellor last week talked about an economic emergency. So clearly, we are all seeing the economic impacts on our communities, be it unemployment, the impact on our high streets, um, and the significant burden on the welfare state, and the kind of growing reliance over the next few months, uh, from thousands of people in Devon, on benefits and that whole kind of infrastructure. And I think there's something as well we need to reflect on, locally, around those people in real economic shock. So whatever we think about the longer term support for people in economic hardship, there's that shock of someone who maybe heard yesterday they were made redundant. How do people respond in the first few days and hours, perhaps before some of that those long-term support mechanisms kick in? And people who are self-isolating, people who have been told to stay off work, clearly there are people who are experiencing significant economic shock, and I think we need to think about, what we can do to support them in that really difficult position, and particularly over the next few weeks and months. The fourth thing for me is around inequality. Again, none of this is new, but I think the virus is clearly, um, this year has been really tough for everyone, hasn't it? And I think everyone on the call will have, um, their own story about, an impact on them, be it a death of someone in the family or someone, that's known to them. It might be, cancelled plans, cancelled holidays, not meeting up for Christmas, etc., etc. But I think the virus has brought into sharp relief the really, lasting impact on those, in poverty, those living in poor housing, and those who already have long-term health impacts, and the virus, but also some of the risks I'm talking, about, really compound some of those things, and also the Black and minority ethnic groups. Again, the virus is having a significant impact on them, but some of the things that I've talked about, again, will have a disproportionate impact. And we really need to be mindful of those people who are at particular risk, and maybe at breaking point at the moment. The next one is around, we'd have called this kind of demographic changes probably, recently. So that Devon has always had kind of pressures in terms of wealth and housing, and particularly, the fact that we're a kind of relatively aging population, and the pressures that brings, across society. But again, the last year has brought into sharp relief really kind of striking changes around working patterns, around commuting, the impact on young people, the impact on people who have been isolated now for the best part of a year, the impact on community buildings, the impact on gatherings. Again, you will have a more comprehensive list than I have, but just understanding how society is going to work moving forwards is a really important thing for us to all think through. And I think just because hopefully in a month's time, 2 months' time, 2 years' time, some of those things will go back into normal. Just because we open up a community building, it doesn't mean to say that people are going to be comfortable using it, or you be using it in the same way that they did this time last year. So I think thinking about how that society and thinking about a local level, how our community has changed, I think is really important in our planning working forwards. And I think the last one, just to close, is around, I'm saying tolerance. I'll call it tolerance. We might call it other things. I think at a simple level, it may be that people are slightly more short-tempered, a bit more grumpy with each other, a bit fed up, less tolerant of each other. But I think at a kind of another level, we see people breaking speed limits and vandalism and whatever the characteristics we might see in our communities. But I think that's clearly, given the experiences of the last year and some of the wider risks moving forward, that's clearly an issue. And I think at a sharper end, we're seeing significant rise in domestic abuse, for example. We're seeing significant rises in hate crime, and at the far end, in small cases, a rise in extreme kind of political movements, and expressions of those. So I'm really sorry. That's been a really gloomy 5 minutes. But as I say, I think it's important that we put some of those things on the table, and I think it will be good to reflect on those through the day, in terms of how they sit with our kind of wider thinking and risks. But I think I'm a glass half full sort of person, so I think there are lots of positives as well, and I think I wonder if we'd met this time last year together, how confident we'd be in the response we've seen over this year, the response in helping others, which in most of our communities has been absolutely kind of overwhelming on both a personal and a community level. And I think whilst there are lots that there's evidence around that perhaps people being grumpy or less tolerant, there are many more examples of absolute kind of kindness at an individual level and a community level. So again, there are some really important building blocks for us moving forwards. I think at a practical level, that there is funding available. So the county council's made about £600,000 available for community groups and responses to date, and there's potentially more available. And again, the council's made available £2 million of hardship funding through district councils. And I think the government clearly, through a whole plethora of funds they've made available, are really mindful of some of the risks I've talked about, and are keen to support some of those things through funding and learning as well. And I guess as well, given the focus of our conversation today, for those people who are really interested in preparedness and planning, this is a really good time to have that conversation, because people are absolutely alive to some of the risks. People are well aware of the impact of the last year, and many people don't want it to happen again. So I think now's a really good time to have some of those community conversations, perhaps touching on some of the things I've talked about as well. Absolutely think about the learning from the last year, particularly around, we're going to hear from Swimbridge later on. Absolutely think about the learning from our community, and make sure we've got a good community emergency plan. So I'll shut up and very happy to take any questions for whatever time I've got left.
Thank you so much, Simon. That was really useful and really insightful. We do only have 3 minutes left of this session before we have to move into another session due to needing to set up the Zooms for that. If anybody has any very, very quick fire question, you can raise your hands on participants. Use the participants button at the bottom of that screen. There's a raise hands. But very quick fire questions. Otherwise, I've put into the chat box my email. And if you have any specific questions, feel free to just drop me an email. I think that given the time, that might be a useful way to make contact with us. So I would like to just conclude by saying a really big thank you to Simon for taking the time out of his very busy schedule to come and talk to us all. And I think whilst Simon did say it sounds a bit doom and gloom, I think we have an amazing opportunity in our communities, working with community emergency planning and the support that we can offer at Devon Communities Together to help you with that, in order to really tackle these challenges and build stronger communities through doing that. As we move through the rest of today, as Simon's already mentioned, we have a session from Swimbridge, a case study this afternoon, who they will be talking about how they've responded. We also have a session on using Zoom to ensure that you can continue meeting up as an emergency planning group. So if you feel like you can't continue your community emergency plan until you can meet in person, please do not feel that that is the case. Join the session on using Zoom, and we'll be able to talk you through how you can do that. And then our next session is from Devon Highways about preparing for winter. And then we have a session, the last session of the day is from Action on Hearing Loss, thinking about how people who have hearing loss may be impacted in an emergency situation. And then we have 3 more sessions tomorrow. So if you are yet to sign up to any of our sessions, do have a look, Devon Communities Together webpage, the resilience page, and there's a big button to join our sessions and the resilience forum. So Simon has also put his email into the chat. Thank you for that, Simon. That's really good of you. Thank you everybody for joining, and I hope to see you at sessions throughout the rest of today and tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.